Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth part of a four-part series looking at defending assessment security in a digital age. This is a book Professor Phillip Dawson has written, and we're looking at just responding to questions with regards to what he's saying in the book so that we can share the knowledge. Hello, Phil.
Hello, great to see you.
Great to see you too. So just for everyone who's joining the call, today we're going to be looking at proctoring, surveillance, and weaponization of academic integrity. The last series, in the last part, we looked at assessment security and artificial intelligence. So I thought a really good point to start is let's begin by shedding some light on what you feel are pros and cons of remote proctored exams.
Yeah, great question. Very contentious question at the moment. Look, I guess there's tons of different uses of remote proctored exams and tons of different products and all that. But overall, remote proctored exams are an attempt to provide kind of what we had in face-to-face exams that at times we can't do in an online environment. And they do an imperfect job of that. So some pros of remote proctored exams are that compared to an unsupervised online exam, there's attempts that are made to really promote assessment security, to try and make sure that students aren't accessing unauthorized materials or getting outside help or using other programs on their computers. And remote proctored exams may do an all right job at that. But along with that comes some concerns about sort of privacy and surveillance. People might not want to be monitored through their webcam or their keystrokes or their microphone or those sorts of things. Some concerns around sort of some tools maybe not being equitable for all students. So, concerns about, say, if you've got unusual gaze patterns, if you're not neurotypical, your eyes might not conform to the way the software wants you to. Some issues detecting, for instance, people with different skin tone, a whole bunch of different things in that sort of equity space. And along with that, some issues, potentially sensationalized, I don't know, around, people having jugs of urine during their test because they weren't allowed to go to the bathroom. When I've told that story, though, some people have said, hey, but isn't that an exam setup thing? If we told people they weren't allowed to go to the bathroom in a face-to-face exam, we'd have the same problem, and we would. So I think some of these things are unique to individual tools or issues relating to the setup of the tools, but then some of them are inherent things like the surveillance issue. There's really no way around that. You're either thinking it's okay to do, or you have a problem, or maybe you're like me and you really have a foot in both camps.
Yeah, excellent. I think that's going to be one of the bone of contention when it comes to considering remote proctoring solutions. I'm just going to take us a little bit back to the part 3. I think it's part 3, where we're looking at around assessment security. So in terms of looking at remote proctored assessment, how do we make the most of remote proctored assessment from an assessment security perspective?
All right, so from assessment security perspective, we've got those sort of two key features of authentication and control of circumstances. So remote proctored exams try and do both of them. And if you compare them to most other assessment security technologies, most other technologies don't try and do both of those things. So remote proctored exams try to do authentication by either matching someone's face against a face in a database, or by getting someone to hold up an ID card and a live person on the other end verifies that, or an AI verifies that. So there's work around authentication there that probably works. And you'll notice I'm kind of cagey with my language because there's not a lot of independent evidence around a lot of this. For a lot of it, we do just have to trust the vendors of these products. And would love to do further research in that space around the extent to which those work. So that's authentication. Control of circumstances is things like I might want to access my notes. If the exam's a closed book exam, I'm not allowed to do that. The proctoring tool enforces that control of circumstances through not allowing me to open the notes that are on my computer, but also monitoring me to see if I'm sort of looking over to the side or if I've got some notes somewhere. There's concerns around the effectiveness of that as well, but it seems like in the literature the presence of that proctoring does act as a deterrent to students trying to use things like notes or accessing a third party for help or that sort of thing.
That's quite interesting. So we're looking at authentication and control. I forget what control.
Yeah,
So
control of circumstances. Yeah.
control of circumstances. Excellent. So now, I know you do have some views with regards to proctoring solutions, but I also think that part of what I've observed you say in some of your seminars is there is understanding where to best use solutions. So now looking at remote proctoring or proctoring solutions in general, what are some best use cases for these solutions in assessment or learning?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in how we choose the right tools for the job. And I'd be really opposed to anyone saying we should ban remote proctoring, for instance. I've even written pieces against banning multiple choice questions because, yeah, there are problems with multiple choice questions, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't use them. There's an appropriate time for the different tasks. I think remote proctored exams are useful when we need to assess things at a distance. So that's the first thing. We need to do it that way. And we need to control circumstances and authenticate who's doing the task. It's hard to come up with other types of tasks that we can do at a distance where we have both of those things. So examples of that are the later assessments within a degree program that really contribute to deciding if someone is fit to practice or worthy of graduating with a degree. In other words, that they've met the learning outcomes. Those might be times where we need to do that, especially if we need to do something like assess lower level sort of learning outcomes, things around memorization or more basic problem solving or that sort of thing. Those are really hard to assess remotely if you don't have the control of circumstances. If you give students a take-home test and say, write down which parts of the body these pictures correspond to, and do it without looking at your materials, in workplace compliance tests that I have to do, where it's about my legal requirement to do something or anti-discrimination stuff or whatever, I personally will look up the stuff on Google while I'm doing the test, and I know that's what people do. We can't expect students to behave differently, but if we need them to, proctoring's an okay approach to try there.
Excellent. I think that's where most edtechs and assessment solutions need to start thinking about when is the right time, or what's the right situation, what's the right circumstances to make use of the solutions. Oftentimes there's all the conversation, oh, we shouldn't use proctoring solutions, so it has this and has that. But I think you've just hit the nail on the head, which is looking at on what aspect of the student's learning can that be involved in. I know we're not going to go into the whole assessment for learning in this series. Maybe in another series we'll look at that. But I want to touch on the idea of weaponization of academic integrity. This has been going on for a couple of years now. And so I want you to, how would you describe what that is? And is this a good thing or a bad thing when you look at it from a teaching and learning perspective?
All right. So in the book, I talk about sort of the weaponization of academic integrity, that these tools that we have now might start to be used against people. And it's really interesting. So, yeah, there are some high-profile political cases, for instance, people who it's been found that their PhDs contain a lot of plagiarized material. When people have run those PhDs through text matching tools, those people have been found out. Some of them have fallen from grace. Some of them are still in power, and a really interesting exercise for a reader to go and look at that. But I guess it's also about how over time our standards and expectations have changed, and in different traditions, those sort of things have changed. If we applied our current understandings around plagiarism and our current rules to Martin Luther King's PhD thesis, we probably would find that he plagiarized material. And even the I Have a Dream speech is allegedly plagiarized material as well. However, within the particular traditions and ways of scholarship and ways of giving credit to different sources and all of that, and also just within what was going on at the time, it's been decided by the institution that gave him his PhD that actually, no, it wasn't plagiarism, it wasn't that. Because our standards and sort of touch points change over time, and we can't retroactively apply today's views to back then. And I hope nobody is able to do this, but I am sure if you ran all of my undergraduate work through text matching tools, you would find enough in there to hang me. Because that sort of stuff, it wasn't big when I was going through, and I didn't have that sort of formative use of it. So I worry with what we have, we might look back and sort of penalise people. I also worry about what's in the future, because I think at the moment we have a lot of plagiarism that's not text matchable plagiarism, it's the plagiarism of ideas, and we don't talk enough about that. But when we have semantic matching tools in the future, tools that can say this piece of text and this piece of text have different words, but they say the same thing, when we have those tools, we'll uncover another trove of plagiarism. So it's concerning these technologies might be weaponized against people in the past.
Yeah, I will not be sending out the forces against you. So I'll just continuing on that train of thought in your book. I think this is one of the things that actually, if I'll use the proverbial got my hair standing, was in the book you said the future of surveillance is weaponization. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it is sad. I do just think that's what's going to happen to us. So the things I described about the future technologies that we're going to have, I think those will be applied against students, against members of the public in ways that don't have our positive academic integrity mission in mind, that are more intended to hurt people. So, yeah, I am concerned that student behaviours that we consider okay now will be penalised, or that we just don't have a way to talk about now.
Yeah, I often wonder when things like this, when technology evolves and we start finding out all these things, do we just retract or recall everyone's degrees and scholarly articles and say you actually did something wrong? So yeah, it's just something I always think about. I'm like, wow, the way technology is going, at some point there will be no new original thoughts, because someone would have thought about it in some way, shape, or form. There might be the same level of emotion or the same context reading. I don't know. But yeah, it's just something that I thought I'd just call out there as part of your book. Also, we're going to continue on the surveillance conversation. And could you describe the surveillance culture as it relates to academic integrity, e-cheating, and assessment security? I thought the way you described it was really good in the book, but I want you to bring that to life in this conversation.
Yeah, so David Lyons has a great book about what he calls surveillance culture. And he's been a surveillance studies scholar for a long time and sort of charts the way that surveillance has changed. So back in the old days, surveillance was something that was done by the state in a pretty targeted way against people who were thought to be potentially guilty of doing something or about to do some horrible thing. As surveillance has changed towards what he calls surveillance culture, it's now something that's done routinely to everybody, but not just to everybody, but by the individual. So people are now active participants in surveillance, and he talks about things like social media. I'll upload picture of my cat, and that's got all this information about myself, and my friends see it and they like it, and all of these interactions and where we are at a particular point in time, and all of that stuff is something that we are actively seeking to provide to, say, Facebook. So this is the surveillance culture of sort of active participation. It's not just involving state actors against bad people. It's about just constant routine surveillance. Now, within academic integrity, we've started to move towards that. So we no longer have systems that we just use to investigate cases. We routinely look at everybody. So if we do remote proctored exams, we proctor everybody. If we use text matching tools, we look at originality. We look at everybody's originality. But even going a step beyond that, we see students making use of tools sort of proactively themselves, so actively participating in that surveillance. When I used to teach with Turnitin at a sort of really introductory level, I would always say, hey, make sure you upload your work and see that report yourself, because you should know about any issues before I see the work. And I still stand by that as good pedagogy. But it is also encouraging this active role in being surveilled, in having your work looked at. I think it's something that we need to be aware of. In the book, I come to the conclusion that it's probably okay, and it's a worthwhile trade-off for us to do. But one of the concerns that I have is, say things like remote proctoring do to an extent normalise that type of surveillance. So it says that being monitored through your camera is an okay thing, and installing software on your computer where you give full control to some third party is an okay thing. So the sort of normalisation of surveillance we need to have a conversation about.
Excellent. So this is the bit where I'm going to be using relying on your expertise to provide some advice to edtech companies. And you talked about Turnitin in this context. So how might edtech companies position proctoring solutions as part of technologies to support assessment practices?
Okay, I think firstly, by partnering with the researchers in the sector. There's a lot of people who have been doing a lot of empirical work out there, talking with students, trying to understand their views, really sophisticated understandings of surveillance, for example, and those sorts of things. So I think partnership. But I think it goes back to what we were talking about before, about when's the right time. And we need to have those conversations. I think if companies that have, say, a proctoring solution understood more about assessment, that might be really great. So a really deep understanding of assessment, about what we call the consequential validity of assessment. So that is, every time you set an assessment task, it has a whole bunch of consequences throughout the student's life. What are those consequences for students? So, as an example, we know that if you set an authentic assessment task or you set a multiple choice quiz, the consequential validity of those two are quite different. The authentic assessment task is going to require students to do a bunch of things. The quiz is going to encourage cramming and forgetting later. So what are those sort of issues for remote proctored tasks? And my personal hobby horse is let researchers try and cheat in your remote proctored exam, and then find out the ways and then fix them, and then we can really have more confidence in how robust the anti-cheating measures are.
Excellent. So those are really good advices. I think one of the takeaways for me and anyone who's watching this is, first of all, thinking about the assessment and knowing when to use the assessment. Like you said, partnering with researchers to see how we could. It could be a little bit of improving the product, testing the product, and also being part of that process so that we can reach that form of consequences of validity, if we can, in terms of assessment design. So I thought I'd just throw this out there. This is our last of 4 part series for your book. Any last words of wisdom for any academic choosing to defend assessment security in a digital world?
Yeah, so I guess my thoughts after having written the book on it and all of that is that this is an imperfect sort of domain. So don't be too hard on yourself. Don't worry and try and get perfection. Go for incremental gains. So little small changes that you can do. Talk with your colleagues about what they're doing. Talk with students to try and understand. And my biggest one is just to really try and balance assessment security, this more adversarial mission, and the promotion of academic integrity. Most of the time, our job is to promote academic integrity. Some of the time, we need to assure assessment security.
Wow, that is a really good way to bring us to the end of this 4-part series. I'd like to say a big thank you to Professor Phillip Dawson of Deakin University. For anyone who's watching this, feel free to purchase or even borrow from your library if you want to. The book is titled Defending Assessment Security in a Digital World. You can always Google it, and I'm sure it's currently, I can't remember where I bought it, but it's currently online. Big thank you again, Phil, and thank you for taking your time to do this with us.
Thank you so much. It's been a real joy to do this.